I think you've heard from Ambassador Herbst that he was one of the architects of a very sophisticated policy vis-a-vis Ukraine in that very important period between 2002 and 2007 and 8, during the high days of the Orange Revolution as well. He truly is one of Ukraine's best friends in Washington, Mr. Damon Wilson. Mr. Damon Wilson is the Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council at this point. He also serves as the Senior Advisor to the U.S.-Ukraine Business Council. Previously, he served as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for European Affairs at the National Security Council, where he did an enormous amount of work that I just mentioned. His other government positions have included Chief of Staff and Executive Secretary at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, Director for Central, Eastern, and Northern European Affairs at the National Security Council, and in fact, because he's going to be giving us what amounts to a NATO perspective on Ukraine's strategic position in contemporary times. He was the Deputy Director of Private Office of the NATO General Secretary, Lord Robertson. So for a NATO perspective, I don't think we can get anybody better than Damon Wilson. Another A for this particular panel.
Thank you very much, Walter, for that kind introduction. I want to thank the organizers for putting this conference together. I'm delighted to be here with some terrific colleagues on this panel for this conversation about NATO and NATO-Ukraine, a conversation that we haven't heard much about NATO-Ukraine in a while. And as Walter mentioned, I've had the opportunity to work on nearly every NATO summit since 1999. And so I just wanted to take a moment this afternoon to offer some thoughts on the way forward with NATO-Ukraine. And a couple of things. I'll try to offer a little bit of a NATO perspective, but my essential theme to my conversation will be the essential link between the strategic, the link between NATO, aspirations for NATO membership, and the domestic, the internal, what happens inside Ukraine. It is an extremely direct link, which many often in the Ukrainian government want to ignore. And my premise will be that this issue, although not really on the agenda today, it should be. Because in my view, Ukraine is a linchpin to European security and stability. And as long as Ukraine's security, as long as Ukraine's future remains ambiguous, ambivalent, I think we have the potential for real instability in Europe. And this is something we want to put behind. And I see NATO-Ukraine as a path to that. So as Walter said, I've been working on NATO issues. I've worked at the State Department, worked at the White House, and I thought that I would start this conversation with a little bit of a tale of two summits, if I may. A tale of two summits. The 2008 Bucharest summit, the summit at NATO that actually took place closest to Ukraine in terms of geography, and the 2012 Chicago summit, a summit taking place in a city that probably has the largest Ukrainian population of any summit that's hosted a NATO event before. Yes, kudos to you. And so unfortunately, Chicago was designed to be a summit about NATO-Ukraine because you're here, but unfortunately, I think because of where Ukraine today is, it's not. So the tale of two summits. I was working on Ukraine at the White House in the wake of the Orange Revolution, where we were moving forward very aggressively, very robustly on a policy of support for transformation of the country, and where we began to really consider serious discussions about NATO and Ukraine, and began a conversation about whether we wanted to support Ukraine in a membership action plan. I was trying to work this very acutely at the White House, and one of the ways we began to try to push this forward was over an incident where I almost lost my job because of Ukraine at the White House. In 2006, as Ambassador Herbst knows, we began to plan a visit of President Bush to Ukraine because we thought it was critical to get an American president on the ground into Ukraine to deliver a message of support in the wake of the Orange Revolution. We had one problem, that Timoshenko and Yushchenko were bickering among themselves. So we went very quietly behind the scenes and we said, look, we know you've got problems, we know you've got issues, but if you get your act together, you form a government together in time, we're going to deliver the President of the United States for a major visit, a major statement of American support, and wind in your sails for domestic reforms, and a push towards your aspirations to move closer to NATO. Pretty big stuff to offer the leadership of Ukraine. Not enough. They failed. They couldn't form a government. We had to cancel the visit. I almost lost my job for having put the president's reputation on the line, and we ended up going to Hungary. It was a great visit, but it was a lost opportunity. That's too much of the story, a lost opportunity in Ukraine. I left the White House and went to Iraq for a year. When I left the White House, Ukraine had been really at the center of our discussion. I came back a year after being in Baghdad, quite detached from Ukrainian issues, as you can understand, and I was surprised at how far Ukraine had fallen off the agenda. I found this very disturbing. So we actually set out to begin a process in December of 2007, January 2008, saying we have a NATO summit around the corner. And we thought 2 years before that Georgia, that Ukraine, that these would be major issues on this summit, but they really aren't right now. We aren't in that situation. And we began our serious process inside the White House to figure out, is this something we need to pick up? We've been disappointed. We've had concerns. There have been real difficulties with Ukraine, Georgia as well. And a couple things happened. One, Yushchenko, Yatsenyuk, Timoshenko came together and signed a joint letter and made a formal request to the alliance to ask for a membership action plan, officially putting that ball in NATO's court. And we ran a very serious process at the White House of soul-searching with our cabinet, with the president, to figure out where U.S. policy needed to go. And despite a lot of reservation among many U.S. officials, a lot of reservation among European officials, the president decided that we had to lean forward. If Ukraine asked for a membership action plan, we needed to be prepared to say yes. This wasn't membership, after all. This was beginning the path towards membership. And if a country asks, if a country is willing to make the transformation of its own society to join what I think Valentin said is not just a military alliance, but alliance of values, a political alliance, then we needed to be prepared to say we're going to stand by your side and help you in that process. But we also had another factor in play. And the president at the time thought, this isn't a certain outcome. We may have a particular historic window of opportunity right now that it may not last. And therefore, it's incumbent upon us as policymakers in the West to try to push and support those Ukrainians that want to push Ukraine through that window of opportunity. And so we leaned forward. We did this very quietly because we knew of European opposition. We ran an intensive campaign of trying to work to bring European leaders on board, focusing in particular, at the end of the day, on Chancellor Merkel in Germany. But we decided to show our cards by going on the offense, and we finally planned that visit of the U.S. president to Kyiv. And it was a visit that we very intentionally attached to a visit of the President of the United States to Ukraine on the eve of the NATO summit to send an unambiguous signal of U.S. support for Ukraine's NATO aspirations, at which the President delivered a strong statement in support of that, and we went into the Bucharest summit without having an agreement, but ready to go into battle. As you all know, that didn't come out so well in many respects. We failed to build a consensus within the alliance for a membership action plan for Ukraine, but much to our surprise, the alliance did decide in Bucharest that Ukraine will become a member of NATO. Now that's a pretty dramatic statement. It's a pretty solid statement. And that statement exists not because the Americans and Germans came to a compromise. We actually failed in our negotiations to come to a compromise. But as we were failing, Ukraine's friends in Central Europe stood up and said, this isn't good enough. We're not ready to let this just fall off the table. This isn't just an alliance between the United States and Germany where the big guys get to decide. This is about our security. Ukraine matters. And it was Poland and Romania and the countries in Central and Eastern Europe that pushed the alliance to come forward with a pretty dramatic statement that Ukraine will become a member of NATO. So where are we now? 4 years later, 2012, that 2008 summit, Ukraine was at the center of that discussion. It was dramatic. It was exciting. And Ukraine was in the midst of it. I've just come this morning, apologize, you could see I was late this morning. I've just come this morning from the NATO summit here. We hosted NATO Secretary General Rasmussen. We're running a parallel summit with young leaders from across the alliance and its partners. And what's striking to me as I've been working on the Chicago summit is Ukraine's off the agenda. What a tragedy. We're in a city with the largest Ukrainian population. This is where we should be talking about it. Didn't come out of the Secretary General's mouth once. I've been working with governments in the lead up to this summit. I myself published a big piece on how to continue NATO enlargement last week, and Ukraine's not part of that discussion. So why does this matter? This isn't just about NATO enlargement or Ukraine. This is about a vision. It's about a vision of a Europe that's whole, free, and at peace. And for us, the process of NATO enlargement is the vehicle that helps deliver on that vision. Enlargement, at the end of the day, it makes Europe more stable. It makes NATO stronger. It's not just about the extension of a military alliance. It's about the integration into a community of values in the transatlantic community. It's about political identity, as Valentin said. And as we've seen in the past, oftentimes NATO enlargement preceded, European Union enlargement followed. Much more complex to pursue a path into the EU. So the reality is that door actually remains open to Ukraine, but Ukraine's not particularly interested right now. So I think that's the challenge facing us. It wasn't always that way. Let me just give you an example of thinking how NATO-Ukraine relations have evolved. Ukraine was in there in '91, shortly after its independence, in this North Atlantic Cooperation Council with NATO. It was the first of the Commonwealth of Independent States to join the Partnership for Peace in 1994. In 1996, it deployed forces into Bosnia with NATO. In '97, we forged a charter on distinctive partnership that set up a NATO-Ukraine commission to show how important and special, unique this relationship was. In '99, we had Ukrainian forces deploying with the Poles into Kosovo. In 2002, President Kuchma, for the first time, articulated a goal of NATO membership, and we launched a new action plan towards that end. We began a series of trust funds for the Ukraine to help them destroy landmines, small arms, manpads, practical cooperation to assist Ukraine's defense cooperation. And President Yushchenko, in 2005, we launched what we called an intensified dialogue on membership issues, a new step on Ukraine's path towards the alliance. In 2007, Ukraine joined Operation Active Endeavor, a naval patrol in the Mediterranean, sent a medical team to join a provincial reconstruction team in Afghanistan. Ukraine was part of NATO's mix. And in 2008, Ukraine asked for a membership action plan. Bucharest agreed, without agreeing on a map, agreed that Ukraine would become a member. And then what happened? President Yanukovych returned to power, and in 2010 declared Ukraine's non-bloc status. First of all, I don't know what that means. Non-bloc status. This isn't the Cold War. We don't think in blocks anymore. Sweden itself, Sweden, the epitome of a neutral country during the Cold War, doesn't call itself neutral anymore. So, right now, NATO-Ukraine relations, they exist. There's real cooperation, practical cooperation, it matters. But in some respects, we're going through the motions because the defense reforms inside the ministry have stalled to some degree. Corruption's becoming more endemic, undermining some of that cooperation. But most importantly, the strategic direction is gone. So what's at stake? It's not just Ukraine-NATO, but more is at stake. Ukraine's democracy. It's actually Ukraine in the West, Ukraine in Europe. So if I might, I want to go back to my premise that NATO, the discussion of NATO-Ukraine, the strategic discussion, is intimately linked to internal developments inside Ukraine, the domestic. So we all here in this room share a vision. It's an independent, sovereign Ukraine with strong democratic institutions and rule of law, with a prosperous free market that's embedded in Europe, a partner of the United States, and at peace with its neighbor Russia. Yet 20 years after independence, Ukraine's young democracy, its cultural identity, its weak institutions, they face political manipulation, and its fragile economy is subject to massive distortions of widespread top-down corruption. In short, Ukraine's sovereignty is not guaranteed, its democracy is not inevitable, and its market is not really free. Ukraine today it teeters between Eurasian malaise and an ambivalent Europe, as we heard from our last speaker. Ukraine's future is in play. The decisions that are being taken right now will help determine whether Ukraine evolves into a European democracy or whether it descends into a post-Soviet authoritarian kleptocracy. We're at a crossroads. Ukraine is at a crossroads. And much is at stake, I would argue, for the transatlantic community, for the NATO nations. But what we're seeing play out in Ukraine is really a set of contradictory policies. In many respects, the government has very clearly tried to drive forward with integration towards Europe, very effectively negotiating the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement, the association agreement with the European Union, while at the same time doing what it can to emasculate its domestic opposition, political opposition. It's actually made progress on both of these objectives. You have an EU treaty that's ready to be signed, and you've got Tymoshenko and Lutsenko in jail. But the reality is, leaders in Ukraine, they must choose. And this choice isn't between Russia and the West. I actually think that's a false choice. The choice is whether Ukraine sees its future in Europe and the European mainstream, or whether it's relegated to the borderlands. There's a choice that this leadership has to take on whether its political preservation is more important than anchoring Ukraine to European institutions, the European Union, and potentially ultimately NATO. Now, we find ourselves where we are today in large part because of the failure of the Orange Revolution. There are no innocents in the story of post-Cold War Ukraine. But if you look at what's happened since President Yanukovych has come to power, a couple of things. I mean, yes, he centralized power. And that's not necessarily bad. There's a degree of chaos in policy making in Ukraine in the past. Tymoshenko couldn't agree. So he's brought order to chaos. It's been easier to work with the Ukrainian government on certain business issues, on certain issues that have been stalled over the years. We've seen some progress. At the same time, Ukraine, in a certain perspective, has behaved responsibly on the international stage, forging forward with a very important agreement with the United States on highly enriched uranium, moving forward with closer negotiations with the European Union. All in all, it's been a responsible actor on the international stage. But if you look at home, what's happening at home, it's time to sound the alarm. Selective prosecutions of political opposition, a more restrictive media environment, disturbing involvement of the SBU in domestic politics, fundamentally flawed local elections in October 2010, pressure on civil society, erosion of free speech, consolidation of executive power of the judiciary, manipulation of the electoral code, continued rampant corruption. If we wondered what Ukraine would look like, it's now being governed like it's Donetsk. But the vision is not lost. It's not lost. It's not lost because of people like you in this room. It's not lost because of Ukraine's own diversity. Its cultural and political diversity, I think, provides a bulwark against any domination of one force. The civil society is actually pretty vibrant and strong. Your voice is strong on this issue. And so as we look forward, there's some tests coming up, tests on how we handle the political prosecutions. I have the honor to be among the first international observers to visit former Prime Minister Tymoshenko in prison since her transfer to a prison outside Kharkiv a couple of months ago. I was the second international visitor to be able to visit Yuri Lutsenko in a prison in Kyiv. The resolution of these cases is important. It's the test for the government. Second, the October parliamentary elections couldn't be more important. Ukraine actually established a pretty good track record of free and independent elections. The first test under this government, the local elections, was a failure. This one really matters. And third, corruption. Corruption isn't just a problem. It's just not a minor problem. It is a national security challenge in Ukraine for two reasons. The scale of corruption in Ukraine today undermines Ukrainian democracy because it incentivizes people in power not to leave power, because what they're doing to those in the opposition, they fear will be done to them. And second, corruption makes Ukraine vulnerable to manipulation by nefarious foreign forces that have ulterior motives in mind. So this means that we need to be able to do a few things. The European Union hold back on the Deep and Comprehensive Association Agreement, but we get in there the way Ambassador Herbst was, and we give electoral assistance to NGOs in Ukraine right now to help put a spotlight on this country as it heads into parliamentary elections. That we push to see a real vibrant energy efficiency and energy sector liberalization strategy, because that would be the most effective anti-corruption strategy in Ukraine. And that we actually not cut off NATO-Ukraine relations, but we look to preserve and build NATO-Ukraine relations. That we continue military-to-military cooperation. I can't tell you how important during the Orange Revolution, it wasn't very clear to us what would happen in the Orange Revolution. As Ambassador Herbst knows, we feared the outbreak of violence. But the relationships that we had built with the Ukrainian military, with professional Ukrainian military, with the Ukrainian intelligence service, It gave us strong relations at a very delicate time where we could send signals at a critical crisis moment and sow enough seed, sow enough doubt in the minds of political leaders in Ukraine that if they had asked their forces to crack down on demonstrators, that they couldn't be sure that they would respond. And that's because we actually sustained strong military-to-military ties, intelligence ties. So no matter how bad it gets, we have to be in the game forging those relationships, because those relationships can come in handy when things get rough. So as this goes forward, checking democratic backsliding, going on offense to help integrate Ukraine, the people of Ukraine, into Europe. We've got to focus on civil society, people-to-people ties right now. And as Ukraine becomes more European, the policy will follow, I think. Continue to help integrate Ukraine globally into a global economic marketplace that promotes rule of law. And we've got to back Ukraine's sovereignty. Putin's back. Putin's back in the Kremlin as the president. The vision of the Eurasian Union is out there. President Yanukovych, to his credit, has stood up against that vision so far. We have to back them up in that. Because if it's left unchecked, if a Russian vision of a Eurasian Union that tries to take back and regain control and influence over Ukraine and its neighbors, if that's unchecked, I think it leads to instability and potential conflict. This all matters because Ukraine's a big country, the population of Spain, the landmass of France. The history of instability in Europe is about instability between the land between Germany and Russia. It's about Ukraine. And that's why I think its future relationship, its security relationship to the West, and ultimately its security relationship to NATO, is a guarantor for stability in the region. But it's also, I'm going to agree with Ambassador Herbst, it's also our best hope for change in Russia. If Ukraine fails, it only validates Putin's view that democracy is dangerous. If Ukraine succeeds, it's a direct challenge to show that Russia's backward cousins and Ukraine's, that they can actually succeed. There's a lot at stake here. Ukraine's at a crossroads. Its democracy is in play. Its place in Europe is in play. Its reliability as a partner of the United States is in play. So I think our goal is to figure out in this tough time, how do we actually restore NATO as an objective of Ukrainian policy? It has to be Ukraine's decision, but it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen organically because Ukrainians themselves increasingly want this. It depends on political will and leadership. It depends on education to help folks understand what NATO is not. If you're Ukrainian today, you still think of NATO through the Cold War lens. It's about education, and it's about laying the groundwork now so that until these policies can be restored. So I think as we go into a NATO summit here in Chicago, where it's going to be clear, NATO will validate the open door policy. It will validate its commitments at Bucharest. It will say that enlargement has a future in the alliance. But we don't want that just to be an enlargement vision for the Western Balkans and maybe for Georgia, but not Ukraine. Our goal is to figure out how to keep Ukraine in that vision so that we make the commitment of the Bucharest summit, the Ukraine will be a member of NATO. We make that a credible statement and not a joke. Thank you very much.